Hello, my friends. This is Mike, and I am back again. It's been a while. Hope you've been enjoying the show so far. There's certainly been a lot going on. Today is January 11th. I think the last one I did was probably in December. So let's go. Let's jump right into this one. We're gonna cover a bunch of good stuff. So we're gonna talk a little bit about consciousness and then how that relates to ARGs or alternate reality games. And the reason why we're going to do this is it will provide a better understanding of how consciousness works because, it's been said the hardest thing to understand is that which you understand with. And we are in the midst of a battle on the consciousness theater. And the better you understand it, because, it's not really something which is talked about, the better you can protect it. But then ultimately, all of this work is so that we can transcend the standard operating consciousness, which is been on this planet. That's what all of these videos are really about, are learning how to break away from how we experience reality. And I don't mean this purely in a like a mental construct, but like literally, reality changing. Remember when I did that video, or there was a slide in a video I did a couple weeks ago, and it had a bell curve, and I kind of defined insanity and how insanity is just relative to what other people think reality is. Well, we're going to go and push that limit. I put that slide in there because we're going to be pushing the limits of what we think is normal reality. And, arguably, this has always been something which people have done, seekers have done. But it's at times like this where that it almost becomes a necessity. So we're going to talk about consciousness, ARGs, which stands for alternate reality games. And then we're going to talk a little bit, I'm going to use my own ARGs or my own ARG as an example of how it works, and I do this as maybe an inspiration. We're sharing tricks, I guess. We're all kind of like in the same boat. And then I guess that's what we're going to cover. So let's just jump right in here. So where are we? I want to talk about consciousness. So consciousness is a big topic. Like, when you say, I want to talk about consciousness, that's like, I want to talk about the human being. Like, there's infinite ways to talk about it. And I'm not necessarily saying like, what I'm going to be talking about is like the limit of the definition. I'm just providing, I am providing my definition of consciousness. And the purpose is not to say that this is the right one. The purpose is so that when I am using that word, what I am making reference to. That's a very important thing in communication, and we see it lost very, very frequently in our modern time, is that we do not define the words we use. And when the words, particularly when they are abstract in nature, if they do not have a definition, you may not exactly know what the person is talking about. You may have assumptions as to, oh, well, this word means this, and their assumptions are different. So that's where I'm going to begin with defining what I mean by consciousness. So consciousness, we're going to begin with like, I'm referring to like perception, what we're actually perceiving, what we are focusing upon, where we're putting our attention. Okay. And so there's infinite ways or infinite things which you can put your attention on, and that is part of consciousness. So what it is that you're actually focusing upon. And then also part of consciousness is then your inner beliefs. And we all have inner beliefs. And so what happens is we go and we have some piece of input some piece of input, this is what we're perceiving, and then it comes inside, if you will, and then it is balanced or compared upon our beliefs, and this is where our reality comes from. And some of the beliefs we're aware of, the beliefs that we hold, and then probably the ones which are most established within an individual, within you, within me, are the ones we don't even know. We don't even think of them as beliefs. We don't even think of them like, well, this is just the way things are. So it's not even so much beliefs as much as the concepts of reality in which we identify with. So this is how, you go and you look at everything which is going on in the realm of politics, and two people see the exact same news footage, and then it comes in and it hits their inner identification, and then that inner identification will go and say, this is what I'm seeing, and then they go and they respond to it, okay? And so that's the other part. So you have your perception, you have your inner beliefs, and then you have the outer world. The outer world is which, what you are perceiving, and, what are you interacting with? And the most basic or baseline level is the natural world, like nature. And then there's people, and then there's technology, there's books, there's all these different things. So it's you've got the perception, what you're going to put your focus on, and then it comes in, what it goes and it is measuring against, and then what it is that you are actually perceiving. And there is a huge continuum for all of those, for all three of those different attributes. And so I indicated earlier, I said there is a war on consciousness, theoretically. There's always been, at least for as long as we've been around, there's been this war on consciousness. So this is the reason why. Consciousness controls behavior, and behavior dictates outcomes. And when someone controls consciousness, they control outcomes. And so we're going to get a little bit more into this, but we live in a world of control freaks. The entire nature of empires, for as long, how many empires have there been? But whenever you see a people, and it's, all throughout history, you see empire builders. They're control freaks. Rules and regulations, and this is how you do things. These are control freaks. And so what a control freak is interested in is controlling your behavior. And you control the behavior through consciousness. And how there's all sorts of different ways which you can control consciousness. You can control consciousness by affecting any of these sort of things, what people are paying attention to, what their inner beliefs are, what they're looking at. All of these things are going to impact consciousness, and then that will ultimately impact behavior. So, let me go and, this is long-term example of controlling perception and inner beliefs. This is, this is part of what the education system, the indoctrination does. It goes and it sets the inner belief in terms of what someone is looking at, so they interpret it, and everyone sees something and interprets it in the same way. Now, that's not to say that there is not benefits in some of our indoctrination in terms of understanding reality, within all of our measures and scales of how things are, and they certainly form a practical reality. But then there's also a limitation, this is what your reality is, going back to that bell curve. Do I have that bell curve anywhere? I think I have that in this slide presentation. This bell curve right here of when you go and say, this is how you go and you interpret something, that white fluffy thing in the sky, which we call clouds, we all kind of go and we agree that it is, it's water vapor. And, maybe that's it certainly is an accurate way of describing it, but it's also a limiting way of of how much of what reality is. And it could limit us in terms of what exactly is going on on a bigger picture of reality. So education has always been about getting people to see the world a certain way. There's always been different education for different classes of people. The education and the teaching techniques of the upper elite classes are different than like the middle classes, are different than the lower classes, but they're all indoctrination, and there's certain things they all hold in common. I made reference in a video recently. I talked about the normal schools. That's what they used to call teacher colleges. And they call it teacher colleges because the switch, it moved out of nomenclature to refer to a teacher's college from a normal school to a teacher's college through Columbia University, the Columbia University Teachers College, which is a Rockefeller organization. And the reason why I want to bring that up, where it's also funny, is normal. If you go and you look at the root, the Latin word of root of normal, it is a carpenter's square. That is norma. A norma is a carpenter's square. And so, like in the language there, to make everything normal, to make everything square, to make everything seen through this sort of Masonic lens. And the same reason why you wear the mortar board when you graduate. Your head has been blocked off. You see reality in the way you're supposed to. You're now normal. The Rockefellers. You know what a fellow is? If you are a fellow means that you are owned by something. The Rockefellers, they're owned by what the rock is. The Rockefellers are just like who we know. They're levels up beyond it. But nonetheless, these are means of controlling consciousness, of how we come up with our inner beliefs of what things are, so that we're all on the same page and so that we miss certain stuff. So let me continue on with this. So consciousness, it controls behavior. Behavior dictates outcomes, and consciousness control, you control consciousness, you control the outcomes. And we live in a world, and particularly right now, it's like the control is getting tighter and tighter. There are always maybe ebbs and flows in terms of how tight the culture is. And often when one part of culture is tightened up, another part of culture is loosened to give off a little bit of steam, because, let's be honest, it probably takes a lot of work to go and manage a really big population, of Earth. And so this is how they do it. So consciousness. So now we want to go and move on to alternate reality games. So let's go in and define this. And this is really important to really grasp this as an idea. So I'm going to talk about an alternate reality game. There's a thing called alternate reality game. But when you understand that, there's in the capital A and capital R and capital G, there's a lowercase a and a lowercase r and lowercase g, because the alternate reality game fits the model of controlling consciousness, in fact, of how consciousness works. And it's not necessarily a problem with consciousness as much as it is an exploitation of how consciousness works. So an alternate reality game is, I'll read this definition, is an interactive networked narrative that uses the real world as a platform and employs transmedia storytelling to deliver a story that may be altered by players' ideas and actions. So that should sound familiar. It should sound familiar because, on a certain level, that's what we're doing here. But on another level, it should sound familiar because that's what life is. That's what life in the modern world is. It is this network narrative which uses the real world as the platform, and all this transmedia storytelling, all these different areas where we receive information, and then being able to go and we become involved in the game. And it says the story is altered by players' ideas and actions. And again, that is life. There is a give and take between one's inner world and outer world. And the less skilled someone is of controlling their inner world, the greater the outer world has in controlling their world, their experience, and the greater control someone has of their inner world, the more influence they then have on the outer world. That's just the nature of life on Earth. So let's go a little bit deeper. The form is defined by intense player involvement. So this is talking about, like, the actual alternate reality game. Like, people do these things, and we're looking at this as a model for understanding how our reality is being dictated to us right now. Like, when I get into some of the details, you're going to go and see it. So I'm being specific about the definition of alternate reality game, but be loose with it in terms of applying it to something which would not normally be considered an alternate reality game. Hopefully that'll make more sense in a moment. So here it is, the definition. There is a great deal of debate surrounding the characteristics of which the term alternate reality game should be defined. Sean Stacy, the founder of the website Unfiction, has suggested that the best way to define the genre was not to define it. Okay, that's a big deal, and we're going to understand why in a moment. And instead, locate each game on 3 axes: rule set, authorship, and coherence. Let's go on to the next slide, and maybe we'll come back to this one. So these here are the 3, the 4, unique terminology points tied to alternate reality games. So there's a puppet master. So that's kind of like the person who is behind the scenes, who like sets up the game. There's a curtain which separates the people who are playing the game and the person who's devising the game. And then there's this thing called like a rabbit hole or a trailhead. So this is like an entranceway into the game. Like, oh, I didn't realize the game. And so it says, like, usually it comes from the internet, from the website. So it's like, oh, I didn't realize this is something which is going on. Like, oh, now I go and I see this thing. And then the last, and this is what is most significant in terms of understanding like consciousness, is this idea called "this is not a game." So I want to talk about that for a moment. This is not a game. The syntax, how that phrase is worded, is immensely important. It is not saying what something is. It's saying what it is not. And so when you define something by defining it what it is not, you are actually utilizing pure abstraction. This is not an orange. This doesn't tell you what it is. This just tells you what it isn't. There's a part of your brain, the deeper part of your brain doesn't understand abstract. The only part of the brain that understands abstract is the higher thoughts of mind. And so by forming it this way, or by stating it this way, it's definitely talking to that part of the brain. But at the same time, when you split the brain like that, this is like how a lot of like hypnosis and NLP works. But more importantly, it's what this implies. So this is not a game. So this is saying, well, if it's not a game, then what is it? Well, it's reality. And so this is when we begin to recognize consciousness, reality within consciousness is relative. We talk about objective reality and subjective reality. But the truth of the matter, if you're a human being, is you are playing in subjective reality. And there are a group of people who do objective reality, but they're probably not here. They're busy sitting on top of a mountain, and they are, they're practicing very, very strong mental meditation techniques to clear their mind of any interpretation of reality. If you're here, you ain't doing that. And that's not to say one is better than the other, but it's to recognize there's a time and a place for different types of consciousness. So let's go back to this again. This is also a description of how your consciousness works. So the puppet master, you could call that like your unconscious self. NLP, I think they call that would be like the executive center. I think that's what it's referred to, like this higher level. Maybe it's your subconscious, like all of these parts of your experience which your conscious mind is not in touch with. There's a curtain, there's a separation between the unconscious and the conscious mind. There are rabbit holes and trailheads. This is just like, whatever you're perceiving, whatever's capturing your attention. And then this is not a game. Whatever your inner beliefs are, whatever what you identify with. And it's different for everyone. So we'll go back and look at like the political landscape right now. Someone who's identified with like the Trump movement, someone who's identified with like, anti-Trump. These are internal beliefs. These are their realities. When they see something, this means that. When I go and I see this, I know that that is a staged operation. When I see that, I know that's proof that these people are out of control. Doesn't matter what objective reality is, because there is a internal reality, the subjective reality, which is what trumps it all, pardon the pun. And so this is going to define one's action depending upon what they're seeing and what their inner belief is, Same thing as it relates to like receiving information about viruses, for example. Like there are certain beliefs which people know. Maybe some beliefs are more accurate than other in terms of how things work. But nonetheless, the consciousness is going to then dictate behavior. So where are we? So we've got the alternate reality games. We can think of that in terms of actually how we go through life. But then we can also go and see like an alternate reality game is basically almost all of our life experiences. And here are some examples of like, these are ARG-like. They're not exactly ARGs. They're not, some of them, they're exactly like. But for the most part, they have qualities which are similar to it, where you go and you step into an alternate reality. Like going into Disney World, going into an amusement park. If you're a parent and you take a child to Disney World, when you walk through that opening, like, oh, okay, yeah, it's all make believe. But there's part of you that like kind of gets into it and that buys into it, and you're seduced by it. And and I would say like the sort of adults that are still completely like Disney engrossed, who fill their adult lives with trips to Disney and Disney films. It's because there's part of them which is really caught up in that ARG. And Santa Claus is an ARG. It meets this same sort of thing. It controls behavior. It creates this false sense of reality, and this is not a game. Disney World, I think this is when I first heard about this, it just blew my mind, the level of like, sort of mind control this is. You could go, if like, you've got children, you take them to Disney World and you stay in like the Disney hotel, you can arrange to have like one of the actors dressed as Cinderella come and put your child to bed. That's a level of ARG. So we've got ARGs around us all the time, and military grade ARGs are called PSYOPs. They're the exact same thing. There's a puppet master. There's a curtain. There are all of these like rabbit holes, trailheads, so you can get into the PSYOP, and it is to create an alternative reality. Now you don't think it, so it has to work for someone to believe that this is not a game. They're not like, for it on its most in extreme level is that this is not a game. This is a PSYOP. Propaganda, all of the propaganda and fake news, and like, that is more or less like ARG-esque in the fact that this is not a game, and this is like, I am reinforcing a certain level of reality, which is being met by your internal beliefs, what you identify with, so that, it just reinforces it. This is echo chamber. This is like everything which like, how Google and Facebook and how they just keep reinforcing the message, regardless of what your message is. The DuPonts Going back to the 17 and 1800s, the DuPont family made their money because they were selling ammunitions to both the North and the South. They didn't care what side it was, as long as the other sides are killing each other. You know, as much as we're seeing, like, you know, a shutdown of a particular ideology on social media right now, they don't really matter. Like, you know, they set up social media so that it's just going to reinforce those sort of extreme beliefs so that it can begin to control consciousness, control behavior, and blah, blah, blah. So we see that. And we can begin to recognize, you know, ARGs are like, that is the name of the game of life on Earth, and it's also the name of the game of how your inner world works. And so when you begin to understand the rules and how it works, then you can become the active participant, not necessarily in someone else's ARG, because they're control freaks. The goal is to get you in someone else's ARG. The real battle is between the you know, the control freaks and the freedom lovers. Remember, like after 9/11, the terrorists hate our freedom. You know, it makes no sense, you know, from a certain level, but it's totally true, because the control freaks do not want you to have your own ARG. I promise you, no matter what you think your reality is, it's basically an ARG. Why is that? Because the nature of being human, the human experience, is built upon a mystery. We don't know where we are, we don't know how we got here, and we don't know what we're supposed to do. So to think that you are standing on any level of objective reality is a falsity. That is just not an option. You have to embrace the fact that it's going to be subjective. If you're going to tell your story, if you're going to have meaning in your life, well, then there's going to be an ARG involved. And once you recognize that, then you can begin to author your own, or at least surrender to the ones which are already telling you. So I found this one line. I was doing like some research on psychological operations. There are all sorts of documentations of, you know, from the military, which is available online, of like psychological operations and like how you go about it. And I was like comparing it to, like, you know, ARGs and so forth. I pulled this one out because it made me rather, I laughed, because the author of it is Frank Goldstein. And, you know, if you're familiar with 1984, the book, and we all are, like, this is one of those books. If you went through high schooling in North America, I don't know about anywhere else, but you are going to read 1984. It is standard reading, and this is to get these ideas in your head. And in 1984, the fictional bad guy, the boogeyman, who the ultimate PSYOP within 1984. So the PSYOP of 1984, the ARG, was this made up person called Emmanuel Goldstein. So, you know, we've got like Goldstein telling you about, you know, writing a manual about psychological operations. But that just kind of tickled me. So now we're going to go a little bit deeper with this, and we're going to look at game theory. So game theory, this fits into it. These are all games. These are games to control people, control their consciousness, so then they go and control themselves. All right. And so game theory is, it's the study of mathematical models of strategic interaction among rational decision makers. It has applications in all fields of social sciences, as well as logic, system sciences, and computer sciences. This is the study of how people act. So game theory, let me go back right here. We're going to see right here. So game theory, it really did not exist as a unique field until John von Neumann, John the New Man. If you've seen any of my work on ENIAC and the Singularity, this is John the New Man, same guy behind the first computer, published a paper on the theory of games of strategy in 1928. And so the backstory, which is told about this, is John von Neumann, who is said to be the most brilliant mathematician, you know, in the last 100 years, he was interested in poker, and by being a mathematician, he understood all of the probabilities of poker, but then he was like, but poker includes bluffing, and that's something which does not fall underneath normal probability distribution. And so he started working on game theory to begin to incorporate all of these other aspects of like how human beings interact. Like, I mean, I'm not a mathematician. I know about game theory as a theory and not as a mathematician. And so game theory begins, remember, this is the most brilliant mathematical mind easily in the last 100 years. And we're led to believe that this is just about games of chance. It is not about games of chance. He's not going to go and put all of his energy into that. It's going into something much, much deeper. So game theory was really picked up by the Rand Corporation. I've talked about the Rand Corporation a lot. And the Rand Corporation just ran with it. And they're utilizing game theory to understand how human beings work. And they would come up with all sorts of different scenarios where they would put human beings in these really like interesting predicaments where they would have to make decisions, and they would go and they would have theory and then they would test it. That's what RAND stands for. RAND stands for Research and Development. It's what the biggest military industrial think tank. RAND is also RNA and DNA. And when we get into the synchromistic level, Rand McNally, mapping everything, because this is what game theory is doing. It's mapping how human beings work. It is Ayn Rand. There's so much Rand in there. Rand is deeply embedded into the collective consciousness. But nonetheless, we've got game theory has been really studied both in terms of a social science and a mathematical science by the military-industrial complex for at least 80, 90 years. And so when we think of alternate reality games, when we see all of these sort of game things, and the word game has this kind of connotation of not taking seriously. This is not a game. This is part of the PSYOP. Everything has been studied. Other big names associated with game theory is John Nash. If you remember the movie A Beautiful Mind, that was about John Nash. And if you remember that, he was quote unquote a paranoid schizophrenic, and there are definitely implications of MK Ultra and all sorts of devious sort of government work into his mind. But the point I'm trying to make with all of this right now is recognizing that game and gaming is something which is studied, and it is an approach to look at controlling humanity, and it's a way to understand how our consciousness works. It's mapped out, and our consciousness works. We're gaming people. And game is also not an acronym, an anagram. It includes mage in it. The magician. We'll get to that in a little bit in a moment. So now let's switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to talk to you about my ARG, because we all got ARGs. I'll be the first one to talk, if you're here, you probably know exactly what my ARG is. And I'm not saying like it's anything other than my reality, okay? And it is a reality which I have... it's not so much I've constructed as much as I have discovered it. So let me go and spell it out for you. And the reason I'm doing that is to give you an idea of what maybe an ARG of a conscious player looks like. Because everyone who's out there or who is watching, receiving their information from the computer screen, there are, whether you want to look at it as a ARG with a capital A or with a lowercase a, meaning like this is specifically designed as a game or a simulation, or whether it is that's just the nature of consciousness. It doesn't matter. That's what's happening. You go and you look on the computer and you go and you interpret that. And if it changes your behaviors and all this stuff does, well, then, you're in it. So let me go and spell mine out, and so you can see it. This is kind of fun, and then we're gonna go in some weird stuff. All right, so movies. Movies are trailheads for me, rabbit holes, particularly Christopher Nolan films. Now, I do not say Christopher Nolan because I choose Christopher Nolan. I do not say like, oh, I like his films. There's a lot of stuff which I like, which I don't think is really part of my ARG. But what I have noticed by studying, by being aware of where I put my attention, and I put my attention on synchronicities, I've seen a level of synchronicity in his movies, unlike other synchronicities, that I know there's a connection there. And so I don't necessarily define what that connection is. I don't believe that Christopher Nolan by any stretch is making a movie for me, but I do know that there is something through his consciousness which is connected to mine. I believe this is true for most people. The people who I interact with and I talk this type of thought with, everyone has a certain sort of thing. It's usually a person, a movie, someone who is like on a larger scale node in terms of the amount of influence they have on the rest of humanity. And there is a connection, a higher degree of synchronicity which they receive from that person. I think this is true for anyone who's going to go and become conscious with their ARG games. I do the same thing with fantasy books. If you saw my last video and I talked about like, the silver coin, reading about it, and then I got a silver coin in the mail, and then like I read about the silver coin again, like that's an example, seeing these sort of things. I identify synchronicities and dreams. They're very, very meaningful to me in terms of navigating this is not a game reality. For me, I find flowing water and the mineral world, like stones and like natural rivers, like the natural formation of rivers. This is the baseline of a reality in which, I go to, like the outer world. I put more value in the outer world. I put value also in like, the people I interact with. I put less value in technology. Technology is controlled by AI. It is an algorithm. An algorithm is a synthetic version of, what we could call the Tao, for lack of anything else, like the big operating system. Like, let's call all of life on Earth is the simulation. I'm not saying it's a computer simulation, but we'll call it the simulation. And then we have like the invented one, primarily from culture. That's the matrix. So we've got the matrix inside the simulation. And so in the simulation, the ordering system, has been called the Tao. And so like I look to that. That's part of my ARG as opposed to technology. Part of my ARG is like, what is the story which I see? There's a battle for consciousness between control freaks and freedom lovers. I would call myself one of those freedom lovers. And what I mean by freedom, I don't necessarily mean it in the matrix definition. I mean from the simulation. Because it is my ARG. I get to write my own ARG. It is and this is not something I'm choosing out of happenstance. This is something which I have logically concluded based upon how I've seen reality and what I have been exposed to, and coupled with my own inner compass. We all have to have our inner compass. This is our inner belief. This is that subjective part of the story. There's nothing wrong with that. The only thing that might be wrong with it is not recognizing that it's subjective. I probably lie somewhere out here. That's what someone would say in terms of my ARG, what my inner belief, which I'm comparing it to. And so what that includes for me is this notion that there is another way of experiencing life. In fact, I think that there are, don't take my word for it, don't believe me, but there's a battle between those who can time travel and those who can't. And some of the time travelers want us to learn how to time travel, and There are certain people who don't. The control freaks don't want you to figure that out for, a variety of reasons. And, that's the game. That is the game which we're playing. I don't think it's necessarily about time travel as much as time travel is one of the effects of the way one interacts with the simulation as it changes. Like time travel becomes like, oh, you understand reality at a different way before, and so the limitations of time, the way time was seen, is no longer the same. So now it's like, those laws do not impact the experience. Same with like, Newtonian physics. Like, you go into like what is called quantum physics, and so so here are two ways of looking at it. So we've got like Where's Waldo? If you're familiar with those books, like they got all of those like the cartoons, and every single one of those cartoons, you're training your mind to pick out these small details. You want to pick out Waldo, you want to pick out Wendy, you want to pick out Wizard Whitebeard, you got to pick out Oddlaw and Woof. I didn't realize this until I had children that exists. I thought it was just all about finding Waldo, but no, it's very, very deep. And then there's also like a binocular, and there's a scroll, and there's a bone. Don't take my word on it. Go and check it out. But what's happening is you are training your consciousness to be able to pick out needles in the haystack. So the other thing is 3D magic eye art books. Stereograms, completely different type of consciousness. You're learning how to see things differently, and you can't fake that. It's very, very different. You can't, like Waldo, the harder you concentrate, then you'll eventually be able to find all of the pieces. It's like just through hard work. But to see a stereogram, to see a 3D, to see those 3D magic eye arts, you have to relax into it, and something very, very different. And that is the level of what the next of the time travelers. They're able to see reality in that way. You'll know it. You can't fake it. Like, the people are like, oh, I think I see it. No, if you when looking at the 3D eye, you either see it or you don't. And so if you don't see it, well, then you got to keep on like learning the skill to go see it. So until we're time traveling, we know we're still just like on the looking for Waldo. We're following synchronicities. Once you get to that other level, you understand what synchronicity is. But right now we're inside of it. So 41 minutes into it. So now I'm glad you guys stuck around, because now it's going to get good. Okay. This is what y'all come from, because I know that people are probably mostly interested. They get like the biggest scratches in seeing like the pop culture. So now I'm going to go talk. I made reference to Christopher Nolan films. I'm going to talk about the film Tenet. All right. So anyone who is like, haven't seen it, spoilers, throw that away. Don't watch movies to be entertained. If you are at the level where you're watching movies of being entertained, you're watching movies the wrong way. You shouldn't be on this channel. You're watching movies to be able to gain something. You can be entertained by watching them, but that is not the purpose of why you watch movies. And Christopher Nolan films, like, you need to see those movies a couple times before you understand what's going on anyway. So if you haven't seen it, me telling you like what it's about is going to be helpful if you go and see it. So this movie is basically about there's CIA agent. All of his films are pro military industrial complex. They're all pro military industrial complex, and they're all limited hangouts. They're all telling you part of the story. But then once you accept that, you're like, well, let me go take the pieces of the puzzle which are offered to me. So this particular film is a CIA agent, and he is told that he has to stop World War III, and all he's told is the word Tenet. And then it goes, and the movie turns out to be all about time travel, and that is part of a major part of the plot. And as it turns out, that like someone in the future somehow came up with a technology where they can go backwards and forwards into time, and the modern time, and it's never given a time frame of when it is. Those folks, they don't understand the technology or how it happens. They just know that it happens, kind of like, you don't need to know why your smartphone works, but you know how to work it. So that's kind of the nature of the film. So now let's go one layer deeper. So the movie Tenet, and written into the backdrop of the whole movie is this idea called the Seder Square. So this is the Seder Square right here. Here's the Seder Square. It is 5 words. They're palindromes. First seen in Pompeii. And so the words are Seder, Repo, Tenant, Opera, Rotas. And you can see it goes down like this, and you can see it goes all around. And then throughout the film, this is where the movie gets its title. This is one of the characters' name is Seder. This is another character. This was the forger. Opera, the very first scene in the movie is in the opera. And then Rotas is the security in it. So we see that this is a major part of the telling of this story. So then the question is, what is a Seder Square? So a Seder Square is here it is. So it is a word square containing 5-word Latin palindrome, features from early Christian as well as magical context. It's magic. It's a magic square. The earliest examples of the square dates from the ruins of Pompeii, which some scholars attribute to pre-Christian origins, such as Jewish or Mithraic. All right. So let's go into the magical. So it's basically what we see here, a Seder Square. It works almost like, abracadabra. It's like it's a magical device to help someone do whatever magic they're trying to do. So I'm not saying that Seder Squares work or don't work, but I am saying that they are there's a connotation to magic, and there is a rich history throughout Western culture of them. They're particularly strong it was strong used by the Pennsylvania Dutch. The Pennsylvania Dutch are the Amish, and if if you follow my channel, I live in Lancaster, where we have the largest population of the Amish. They're very magical people. You go and you look at them, like that. Particularly some of the older women, they're dressed like what a traditional witch would look like. But nonetheless, the point I'm trying to make is, if we go back to the movie, is that Seder. The one thing which we know, we don't know how time travel happens. All we know is that it has to do with the word tenet. And it's never expressed in the film that there's a Seder Square. It is just in the subconscious of the film. They're not hiding it. They're putting it in your face. Out of 1 out of 100 viewers of the film, how many actually go and say, oh, there's a Seder Square. It's about magic. It's being implied that the Seder Square, that tenet, is the secret behind the time travel. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm not saying that isn't the case. I'm just saying this is what we're seeing in the Christopher Nolan film. So now let's go here. We know it's all about time travel, and there's this one scene in particular where the time travel and the idea of time travel was first introduced, or how it is working, or how it shows itself in the film. And it was this car chase using this Saab 9.5, and it goes backwards. Like, one of the things which Christopher Nolan does a lot is he uses masks in film. He did The Dark Knight Rises. I talked about that a lot when I did a presentation on the higher side chats, and Bane had a mask, and all of these characters have masks, and The Dark Knight Rise is tied directly to the London Olympic Games and where we are right now. But nonetheless, so we see that the Saab 9.5 is the plot device which is used in order to really articulate time travel. And so it's interesting, because we know, if you know anything about like how Hollywood works, the workings of Hollywood, is product placement's like kind of a big deal. And cars in particular are always like a big part of of product placement. You know, you think about like the James Bond films and like, you know, how important those cars are. I talked about this in another Christopher Nolan film about the Hamilton watch. But what's interesting is he uses this car in this very, very important scene within the film, this very, very important scene within the film where it talks about time travel. And, you know, if you know anything about Saabs, they stopped making Saabs about 10 years ago. So, you know, why is this can't have any sort of product placement benefit. So there is another reason why this is being used. You know, here, Time Warp, the final generation, Saab 9.5, enters production 10 years ago. Can you see this right here? 2019. That brings us to December 5th, 2019. 10 years ago is when the Saab 9.5 entered its final production because they stopped making it. Here's our Saab 9.5. We kind of have we've got like a time frame. So hear me out. This is where it gets really interesting. So this right here, if you're familiar with the film, this particular scene takes place in Oslo, Norway. So we got this model, which we knew came about 10 years ago, 2009 in Norway. So what do we got right here? Remember this? December 9th. What do we got right here? This was December 5th, same time frame, and we have our Norway spiral. If you don't remember what the Norway spiral is, go look it up. This is what was seen in the sky for like 2 days in Norway. It was explained as an out-of-control missile. An out-of-control missile made these perfect spirals. Now, if you've watched the movie, Tenet, it shows you how a lot of these events, which appear to be like these unexplained or big accidents, are actually because of time travel, because this is where the time travel occurred and something happened, which, you know, people started noticing, and then you know, there had to be a like a cover story, you know, a cover story for the ARG. So we've got right here, we've got Norway spiral. It happens. It kind of ties into this particular time. I'm not saying that's exactly what Christopher Nolan is saying, but I did notice that was interesting. We're going to come back to this Saab in a moment, and it's got a kind of an interesting kicker. But I'm going to tell you one more thing, which could be kind of like where he's kind of hinting at time travel in reality again, and that is, if you've seen the film, you know, there is another really kind of like big scene where this airplane crashes into the building. It crashes, and, you know, when else do we know of airplanes crashing into buildings? We've got like 9/11, you know, and, you know, if you're familiar with synchromistic history, like, you know, this is really where synchromysticism really got a lot of structure. Was all of the videos put out by, what was his name, Jake Coetzee, about the 9/11 being the towers being what was the words he used? He didn't call it a portal, but he was implying it like primarily from like a higher consciousness level is what like the whole 9/11 events. But, you know, what we're seeing here is, you know, maybe it was also like we're seeing some time travel, because we've got like the same sort of idea, and we link it into 9/11 one more time, because if you remember in the movie, there was a part of the plane crash which really didn't kind of make that much sense. It didn't add any value to it, just like the Saab 9.5. There was no need to put in a car which is like been out of production for 10 years into like the most significant part. We've got this huge plane crashing into a building, and then they shows all of these like gold bars, all of the like, you know, what are they called? Are they called ingots of gold, and they fall out of the plane, and says, you know, why did they drop the gold bars from the plane? I just watched Tenet for the second time. Fucking brilliant. Adored it. Never seen anything like it before, but I still question, I don't understand. But what was going on with the gold bars being dropped of the plane? What purpose did it serve? Well, I don't know what's going on in Christopher Nolan's mind, but I do know that in 9/11, for those people who remember, there was the missing gold, right? So we've got like a double touch. So is it like a little bit of a telling that the 9/11, amongst other things, it seems like whenever there is a big time travel event that there is a there's also a lockdown on freedoms. This seems to be happening. At least, look at what's going on right now. But we're going to go back to this. We're going to go back to this for a second. Actually, let's go jump right here. So if you remember, I've talked about this in past films, like in Christopher Nolan's Interstellar, the watch was used as a tool in the plot to communicate between the third and the fifth dimension. And then, so, this is Hamilton watch. And they went and they had the special, the Hamilton Interstellar watches for Murph and Cooper. Here were the two characters. And, this is an example of product placement. And they did the same thing in Tenet. There was a Hamilton watch in there. And, I've talked about this many times. The first time I saw, Interstellar, I was kind of I had my mind blown, because this is my personal watch, and it is the Hamilton, it's the same model as they used here, not the special model. They did a special model but it's called a khaki field. This is the watch I have. It's just not like the Interstellar one. I was like, wow, that's a really friggin' strange coincidence. The reason why I picked that watch is because, if you remember, I live in Lancaster, and Lancaster, Pennsylvania is home of Hamilton Watch. It's no longer owned by Hamilton Watch, or Hamilton Watch is no longer an independent company. It's been acquired by the Swatch Group. They don't make watches anymore here, but this was at one point like the biggest watch company, and it was named after the guy who laid out Lancaster City, named James Hamilton. He's a Rosicrucian. He laid it out in Rosicrucian principles. And I bought this watch when I was doing all my research on Mystic Lancaster, and I said, I'm going to tap into the energy so I can understand it. That was why I bought the watch. That was my logic system. So here's where it gets interesting again. So try to guess where I'm going, all you folks at home. Where else are you, right? We got the Saab 9.5. Try to guess what car Mr. Mike drives. This is my car. It's a Saab friggin' 9.5. This is it. It's not the same model. I had the older version than this fancy one, which we see right here. But this is my car in the same color. You can see this is my house. It's number 57. You can see there's the back of my car. I'll even show this to you guys. Look at this. This is when I bought the car. I bought the car from the Mannheim Auto Auction. Do you see when I bought it? I bought it in 2008. I've had the car for 12 years. It's about time I get a new car. Anyone who's got an extra car and they need to get rid of it and it doesn't have Bluetooth and you live in the Northeast, shoot me an email, because that's what I'm waiting for. Just like the silver coin. So again, the reason I'm showing you all this is this is part of my ARG. I'm not saying Christopher Nolan's communicating with me, but I know through Christopher, I've got an unexplainable connection on a personal level with his movies, which tells me to look deeper, And where am I moving forward in my ARG? It's called time travel, my friends. Hopefully you guys are too. So let's go into a little bit more magic, because that's not all the magic we're going to talk to. Let me see. Did I cover all the slides I want to do here? No, there's a couple more. So I showed you that I bought the car at the auto auction. That's one of the benefits of living in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's home of the Mannheim Auto Auction, the largest auto auction on the planet. It's where most car dealers get their used cars. Everyone in Lancaster knows a guy who can get a car at the auto auction. I'll just tell you the story real quick because I think it's friggin' awesome. So I bought this car. If you're going to get a car at the auto auction, you get it for pennies of the dollar. I got this car. This was a 2006 Saab 9.5. I got it in 2008. It was 2 years old. It came off a lease. I think it had like a value of like $25,000, and I bought it for 15 grand. Now I had to buy it sight unseen, and I couldn't drive it. You don't know what you're going to get, but that's a pretty big discount. And I've had it for I guess 12 years now. It's at 190,000 miles right now. I don't know how much more is left upon it. And so, if you've been following this channel for a while, you know that there's a strange sort of connection which keeps popping up with Joe Biden. And this story always shows itself in the Lancaster newspaper, and it's that Joe Biden, when he was in college, he worked at the auto auction. What's at the auto auction? I don't know, but okay, so let's go further. So the key points. Oh, so this was the key line in the movie. It said, once they understood time travel, and they're trying to explain it to one another, they said, you must now look at time differently. And so this goes back to this idea, which I talked about, like this 3D magic art. You need to begin to look at things differently, to really take advantage of the information, like take advantage in terms of use it. Again, I think the whole film is a limited hangout. I don't think it's telling the whole story. It's very, pro-military industrial complex, at the very end. Climate change is the reason for the whole thing. And the antagonist, the bad guy, he was the control freak. They're always control freaks. Remember, we're looking for freedom. How do you have freedom? You get to go and, not be limited by the laws which we are taught that hold us into material reality. Part of the limited hangout, in my opinion, is the implication that you need some very expensive equipment. It is my personal opinion that ultimately all of this is a consciousness exercise. There is something within consciousness that allows someone to transcend, transform, transmutate from one experience to another in absolutely no different of extremity of a caterpillar to a butterfly. So let me go on to another piece of magic. I'm an hour on. Do I want to go? I think I got 20 more minutes. But if you've stuck around this long, let's go for the whole show. So if you've been following me for a while, you know that particularly this time last year, I was talking a lot about 57. The house number which I moved into was 57. I had a bunch of missing cats at some time. Then I did this big presentation on the Higher Side Chats linking in the Kobe Bryant helicopter crash to a helicopter crash that occurred over his high school in 1991 of John Hines of the Heinz Fortune, Heinz 57. And 57 was brought in. And then like a week after that dropped, the whole COVID thing hit. And then I, shortly after that, this particular post, this is an Instagram post, came out on April 3rd. This was next thing. I started talking about the movie Contagion. Everyone started watching Contagion immediately afterwards. Contagion's all about these pandemics and these viruses. And in that movie, the vaccine, which they told us, where the hex notices that the monkey treated with vaccine number 57 has no symptoms, and vaccine number 57 is the solution. It saves the day in the movie Contagion. So let's go to modern times. This story, January 2nd, 2021, U.S. government paid $57 million for vaccine injuries in 2020 as experimental COVID vaccine is fast-tracked. And what do we got right here? This one is December 31st, 2020. Medical center says employee intentionally removed 57 vials of Moderna vaccine. So what are we looking at? What is 57? So let's go look. Remember, we saw the Seder Square come into play. Now let's go look at this. This thing right here, it's called the Sigillium. Is that how I pronounce it? I don't know. Sigillium Day. And this is called by John Dee the Sigillium Day Meth. If you know all of the work on the Susquehanna mystery, it all starts with John Dee. John Dee is the ultimate control freak. He's the guy who came up with the British Empire, and the British Empire is all about control. And he also was what introduced Enochian magic to everyone. And Enochian magic is about control. It's a different type of magic. There's lots and lots of types of magic. And some magics are about controlling other beings. And this is what this is about. This is the Sigum Die. This symbol is used to, it allows the initiated magician to have power over all creatures. That is called control. These are control freaks. This is John Dee. This is his Enochian magic. This is the Enochian, this written by Donald Tyson, one of the foremost experts of Enochian magic. I don't practice that crap. And this is, he's saying, like, all what Enochian magic is about control. Dee hoped to control the hostile enemies of Europe by commanding the spirits of their nations. I'm not saying it works or doesn't work. The evidence suggests it works. But nonetheless, it's a control. This is a control freak. And so why is that significant? Because what is this? What is this shape? What is this? It is composed of two circles, circle 1, circle 2, a pentagram right in the middle, and then 2 heptagons and a heptagram. This is the key part of the shape. It is a 5-pointed star surrounded by a 7-pointed star. This is our 57. This is our 57. In Mike's ARG, in Mike's little ARG, reality gives him information. It's part of my job to understand it. Like moving into number 57, like it was thrusted upon me. That's another story. And then 57 kept showing up and I was attuned to it. And then suddenly, I'm beginning to understand the code, the magic which is being used right now. What is the purpose of this? This is all about control. The vaccine is about control behavior. Everybody's about control. We see that's going on. Whew. So let me go wrap up right now. So all of this is, what I just told you, all of this work which I put out there, the energy to go and make these videos. When I do biomancy sessions, when I talk to people about their stories, it's to come up with a way to become free. We are all in a very literal way, modern matrix society is in the hands of control freaks who want to become more and more and more controlling, which, in the balanced universe that we live in, because this is a balanced universe. Look at the natural world. The ecosystem is in perfect balance. And when you do one thing, something else happens. And so as the control mechanism squeezes harder, something else is going to open up. And so a lot of these things, which used to be very, very guarded and secret and no one knew about, well, this is going to become more and more easy. And that is the freedom. And the freedom is learning how to go from one reality to another. Time travel is an example of what a free sovereign being would be. This isn't about being free and sovereign, not paying taxes. That is another thing, and but that is within the matrix. The whole idea is matrix. What sovereign is. I'm talking real sovereignty. And this stuff I'm talking about, you'd be you showed us, Mike. You showed us on the slide that you exist in on the outer standard deviations of what we call sanity. But that's not exactly, it's not what I'm talking about may not be common, but it's not unheard of, and it's definitely not unheard of within intellectual circles. And so you might be familiar with some of these thoughts if you're familiar with the Monroe Institute or some of the stuff they teach in Esalen. These are all intelligence laced and based, but there's something there, all the remote viewing sort of things. But then we go and we look right here. Let me go show you these guys right here. So this guy, Oliver Markley. Who's Oliver Markley? He is a PhD, and I don't know what P stands for. He's Professor Emeritus, former chair of graduate studies of the studies of the future at the University of Houston. This guy is ingrained in He's ingrained in mainstream matrix living. And this is the sort of stuff he's talking about. You know, he's calling it imaginal visioning. And imaginal visioning uses higher intuition for guidance in making wise choices. Like he would use this. This was done in 2010. He wrote this teaching like business leaders how to tap into higher realities. You know, this guy was mainstream. You go look right here. I did, this is his Twitter feed, last done in 2012. This guy is his mainstream. Lots of good stuff coming from the from the Davos conference. That, you know, this is how we know this is a limited hangout. I'll show you something else which he said. This is from one of his presentations. His presentations is filled with like really, really interesting and like valid sort of ideas, but it's all couched in like, you know, mainstream Davos reality. That doesn't mean you can't take something out of it, but this was one slide which I took from this presentation, which you could find online. This came out in 2013, and he's saying, like, you know, the typical point towards epochal change. They were talking about of how like society was completely going to change, and he was saying that they were right here. This is 2013, and at this point is the civilizational tipping point. When does he say? 2020. When did he say this? 2013. You know, granted, he's going down that one, like, I'm still going to fall underneath the control mechanism mindset, but that's because his ARG is that. You know, we've got different ARGs, or at least I got a different ARG. I'll give you another example. This is something which I found to be very interesting myself. It's called the Field Project. I'm already an hour and 10 minutes into it, so I'm not going to tell you the story about how I came about this, but this Field Project came in my life in the most synchronistic way. I've listened to it over more than I've listened to anything else, and it's all about learning how to train your inner consciousness. It's a limited hangout. There's a lot of stuff in there where I'm like, but that being said, I've never heard anything so good as this. And so the point is, this guy's another. Like he was a college professor in philosophy. He taught philosophy at the college level for 73 to 93. These are mainstream guys. These ideas which I'm talking about here, like, they're really not that out there. Or they're not that foreign. They're not foreign at all. And so when we find ourselves in this situation and we can see that there are ARGs being rolled out all the time, and you're like, you know, that's the way consciousness works. That's the reason why it's used for a PSYOP, because this is how we work. This is what the Rand Corporation learned. This is what game theory was all about. How does the human being work? So I can tap into their system so I can control the outcome. And now we're beginning to recognize that all of the reality is subjective. The question is, how far can you push it? How far are you willing to go outside? And that's a dangerous place. And in the time, you know, 4 years ago, 2 years ago, that would have been like, you know, I don't know if I want to necessarily take that chance. But the state of the world right now encourages, in fact, it demands drastically different thinking. So, this is Mike. Hopefully you got something in on this, or got something out of this, something in on this. When I disappear, it's because I crossed over. But look for my signs. Look for my signs. And I don't see that happening anytime soon. So again, you got the car, you get in touch with me. You want me to help you with your own story, get in touch with me on my website. This is what I do. Don't take any of this stuff too seriously. Take my stuff seriously, but don't take the other stuff which they're trying to use to scare you. Have a good time. This is an exciting time to be around. Talk to you soon.